Challenges to Finish Strong in Math. Hello and welcome to our first Corrections mini conference session. We appreciate all of you joining us for this afternoon's webinar. My name is Melissa Hultstrand, and I'm one of the leaders in our service to correctional institutions across the United States, which includes planning and leading our GED Corrections Forum, which includes directors of education for state DOCs. We know how hard it is to access professional development during these challenging times, especially for those who work in corrections. So with the help of our Corrections Forum members, we lined up excellent sessions for you. Please note this session will be recorded, and when we post the recording, we will also post a certificate that you can download. Now, I would like to introduce our presenter. Debbie Fawcett joined GED Testing Service in 2011. The move to GED Testing Service followed an extensive and robust career in adult education and career in technical education at the local, state, and national level, serving as a division director at the Louisiana Department of Education. As the Director of Adult Education and GED Testing for the Louisiana Community and Technical College System, Debbie was involved in the creation and implementation of the Work Ready U initiative that continues today. As one of the senior directors for GED Testing Service, she directly serves the needs of partners in California and chairs the Professional Development Initiative, which allows her to engage with many states across the GED network of partners. Now, without further ado, here's my colleague, Debbie Fawcett.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It is a pleasure to be with you all today, and we are going to work through a number of issues. Most of all, I got to make sure I can move my screen. Yeah, and I will tell you that's the first time I've ever heard my introduction read aloud, so it, very, very interesting and makes me feel very old and tired and a long-standing member of adult ed. But I am so happy to be with so many of you this afternoon because we do recognize the challenges you have in corrections education. As we have all faced challenges, yours, as always, have added nuances that make it even more difficult for you to continue the forward-moving efforts for your adult learners. So today, what we wanted to do in preparing this for you is to spend a little time discussing the testing and instructional landscape that we see across the country. We're also going to discuss some of the the challenges for multi-level students and what they have in mathematics. Then, as always, we want to bring to you resources to address the instructional and student-driven challenges that we recognize. And most importantly, there will be plenty of time both along the way and at the end to answer your questions. Those of you who I've had the pleasure of speaking with before know that we do a very informal style of presentation. You have the opportunity to post your questions. I will tell you that I will not be reading them, but my colleague Melissa, and also we have CT Turner joining us, will be reading the questions, and every now and then I'll take a breather and we'll try to answer questions along the way. Another thing I'd like to bring to your attention is to look in the pull-out box to the right of your screen and go down there and make sure you see the handouts before you start worrying about, will I have a copy of this PowerPoint? Please note that there's one already in the handout section that you can download. Then you've got the presentation with all of the live buttons and the hyperlinks to the resources and the other information that we're going to share. So with that being said, let's move ahead and talk about the testing and instructional landscape. The one thing I know is that it's going to be a long time before we see in the public sector classrooms that look like this with a lot of on-site instruction and people sitting relatively close together. That ship has sailed for us, and the longer we talk and the more we hear about the pandemic, the greater the distance is before we think we will see what was our normal way of doing business, both in correctional facilities and in the public sector since last March. What we also know, for some reason, clicker doesn't want to change as readily.
Debbie, sorry,
Yes,
this is
yes,
CT.
yeah.
Your sound isn't breaking up, but I don't know if you're like moving your head a certain way. It's like a little bit lower occasionally, and then sometimes
Okay.
it's throttle.
I think it's, thank you, CT. That's using my computer, and I was turning my head because I'm making sure I have some icon that will click and move forward, but I'll try to make sure I stay forward. You interrupt me if I vary, okay? But what we know is beginning in 2020, the type of testing that was done and the type of instruction with some nuances was pretty much the same in both the public sector and in corrections. We had classroom-based instruction and testing on-site, computer-based testing. So we started out that way. Then as we finish, and we're talking about finishing strong in so many ways, today is primarily about math, but if we're finishing, we have to give credence to what's happening in the public sector. First, we know that now that there is not a lot of face-to-face instruction. It occurs in some places, but for the most part, virtual classroom instruction is the standard for most sites. And what we also know is not happening is testing in a testing center, a CBT testing center. I know some states do have access, the majority do not in the public sector. I know many of you stay attuned with our in-session and all of our other PD sessions. So even though you in the correctional facilities are not delivering the online proctored GED test, it is very important that you keep abreast of access to that online proctored GED test, because you have students and adult learners who may be released from the facility who have not completed the test. And since we have such limited on-site testing, to be able to steer them and provide information about the online proctored GED test is very important. So that's the public sector. And we talked about moving ahead, and these were great advances that were made in the public sector to really change the way they were doing classroom instruction. And within 6 weeks on our part with GED testing service to deliver to you an online proctored test. But as I thought of what happened to so many of you in correctional facilities, it was almost like you were traveling back to the future, as you had a very different set of circumstances. Many of you had students who were in lockdown. You no longer had access to face-to-face instruction, which also happened in the public sector, but you could not do face-to-face. You could not do virtual instruction for many of you. I know there are isolated pockets, but the majority of you were shut down, not able to do face-to-face instruction. So what you had to do was go back to basically paper and packets and worksheets and things that you could put together to help your students stay on track, that you could get to them. And I thought about that a great deal as my colleagues and I were putting together some of the resources and strategies given the circumstances you find yourselves in. But the one thing that we see as we look at our GED analytics and GED manager is that, unlike many of the public sectors, you all did have the ability at some point to continue computer-based testing in many locations. So in that way, you have an advantage over the public sector, because in that isolated circumstance, you can begin computer-based testing and continue that moving forward. So if we're going to finish 2020 strong, what you have done is what we always do as adult educators and educators in general. We adapt and we overcome. So what we're looking for today are solutions for virtual instruction, face-to-face instruction, and distance packets for instruction. So those are the three modes of instruction I was trying to keep in mind as we focus today on mathematics. What I'm doing is going over and refreshing and reminding you of a lot of factors that we have known for quite some time. Everybody wants to know, what are students missing on the math test? What do we see? And You may find it repetitive for those of you who do a great job of keeping up with our professional development. But what many of us forget is that although a lot of us have been in adult ed for a long period of time, we always have new people coming into the field who may not have heard this information before. And for those of us who know it, when was the last time we went back and paid attention to reinforcing the basics? Students are still having the same types of problems in math. It doesn't change. The problems that they have don't change, even though the cadre of students taking the test. It all goes back to the basics. So if we can start there and remember what skills a student truly needs to learn, we're going to be way ahead of the curve. These two documents, which I gave you the web link for that you can click on in the PowerPoint or move it into your URL. These two documents are the skills a student needs to know. Obviously, there are a couple of other pages. I printed the first page. These are our performance level descriptors or performance level indicators. There's not a great deal of magic or guessing if you need to know what are the skills a student has to show to pass the test. You go to that link, you print off each of the PLDs, the performance level descriptors, level 1 below passing, but they have to know what's in level 1 to be able to learn the skills in level 2. And if they can do the majority of the skills in level 1 and level 2, they're going to be able to pass the GED test at high school equivalency level. We also have a level 3 that is college and career ready. We also have a level 4 that is college ready plus credit. You can learn all about what the different indicators are. It's based upon the scoring of the test. Below passing is 0 to 144. Passing is 145 to 164. College ready, 165 to 174. And college ready plus credit is 175 and up on the score on the test. But these are important basic things, and every one of the skills here make up the backbone of all of the parts of the test. You have performance level descriptors in each of the 4 content areas. As a new teacher or as a continuing teacher, if you fail to go back and use these as sort of a guide and an informal way of assessing and kind of understanding where your students are, you're making your job and their job in preparation much more difficult. So I can't stress that indicator enough. When we're talking about the basics, especially in math, this is another concept that we know very often when you hand a book to a student and they're looking at the problem, the explanation, and everything that goes with it, you have jumped all the way over to the 3rd column, which is abstract. That's a very difficult place to begin in trying to make math real and in a real world context to students. As you start with the basics in math, you've got to start with concrete items, hands-on concrete materials. And I know that's very difficult in a correctional setting, but we can't ignore the fact that any opportunity to use paper pieces or whatever you're allowed in manipulatives to see it, touch it, feel it is the best way to begin explaining concepts. Once you've done the concrete explanation, move to representational. That's when they can begin to kind of draw and observe diagrams and pictures, and they can watch the teacher moving and playing with hands-on materials. Then you're ready to move to abstract, and it makes the things in a software module or in a written page of a book begin to make sense, because whether you realize it or not, they're going to fall back on prior knowledge of moving from concrete to representational to having those written words on a page make sense to them. Another important document that I want to make sure we understand in math, as you are working, you must know what are the calculator prohibited indicators. Everybody knows that the first 5 questions on the math test, you cannot use a calculator. That's done because in those first 5 items, there are 9 different types of calculator prohibited indicators. Only 5 of them are tested, and you don't know which of those 9 will be the 5 that will be tested. But it's important because this helps as a test to assess whether the student has the cognitive ability to do the kind of math computations. The calculator can hide or mask some of that understanding. So that's why you have those first 5 items on the test that are calculator prohibited items, and these are the indicators. And I will attach that as a handout when TECO goes to post it. It is not in the workbook that we're going to post with a lot of the pages on here that I'll note to you. Some of the things that are basic that we need to go back and remind students of, we take for granted that they know some of these most important things. Making sure they can use a number line, we take for granted. We think a number line is such a basic thing. Everybody understands how to move up and down a number line. Our students have great difficulty in number lines. And when they can understand how to use a number line, you have opened the door to help them see relationships, see the difference in the size and the scope of the numbers as they move up and down. They also have to understand positives and negatives on a number line. And it is an often overlooked assumption that this is not something that needs to be refreshed and taught. That is not true. We can see that from the mistakes or the problems that students have. Okay, another one, absolute value. We don't think about absolute value as something that people do not understand, but our students need to be refreshed and reminded of what an absolute value is and what those parallel lines mean outside the number that we're looking at. Absolute value just indicates how far a number is from 0, whether it's whether it's a -6 or a 6. When you put it on the number line, that absolute value is the same distance away, one direction or the other. It's still the distance. So absolute value is how far a number is from 0. Doesn't matter. Whether we're looking at a positive or a negative, it's going in one direction or the other away from 0. So the absolute value of, for example, that 6 or a -6 is 6, the distance from 0. Other operational things that are difficult for our students, operations on rational numbers. Recommendations, they know they have to be able to multiply and divide with decimals. And they have to be able to compute with all of these things, fractions, mixed numbers, negative numbers, and they need to be able to use the order of operations. And we're going to take a closer look at how we can help students understand, demystify, and decode decimals and fractions and mixed numbers, and especially negative numbers. That's a real difficult item for some students. Fraction tiles. Let's give them something that shows a linear model and gives them an overview and shows relationships of a half to a third to a fourth and on down the line. These can be cut with strips of paper, and they can be laid out on top of the desk using paper to show those linear models. And a page with the fraction tiles is included in the workbook that we'll post, and you can pull that out, cut it, do whatever you want with it. But we use the linear model rather than a circular model. Don't ask me to do fractions by looking at a pizza or a pie, because it's hard to see those relationships. In a circular model, a linear model makes it far easier to understand. If we want to understand how to simplify fractions, they don't know their multiplication tables. You're at a point now where it's going to be really hard to worry about teaching them multiplication tables, but I guarantee if you simplify fractions and you show them this table, you just number 1 through 10 down the left and the right, and look at how it explains the relationship. Go across that top line, 1/2, 2/4, 3/6, 4/8. That is such a simple thing for us to look at, but it's the first time they've ever understood how these numbers have a relationship. Drop it down on the left-hand column, 3 to the 4th, 3 times 4, and move it down to 12, and then look at the lines across in the relationships. You really can help them understand, and they may not memorize their times table, but these charts where they can draw, and many of these students have different learning or reading disabilities, to be able to put their finger on a 5 in the left column and a 5 at the top and bring them together to understand 5 times 5 is 25, and then see these other relationships make a tremendous difference in what we do with our students and where they go with understanding fractions. I'm going to roll through a couple of these. Look at the 21 over the 28, let them pull their fingers all the way back to the left-hand column to see that, 21 over 28 can be reduced all the way down to 3/4 with the right divider, okay? And more examples of that, well, like I said, 21 to 28 is the same as 3/4 and 9/12, and we move on. We could put 45 over 72. You don't have to do the columns side by side, but using fingers, very tactile, dragging across these charts brings it home a little bit to them. So the fractions are very important. Also, the rules of exponents. When you're looking for papers and packets to put in there for them to use as a guide, I would pull this sheet out of your workbook, I'd print it off, and I'd put it in everybody's guidebook. These rules of exponents, it's a good thing to have. You don't have to memorize it, and we show you the rule, 1 through 9 rules of exponents here, and an example with the correct answer in the right-hand column. So these are things you want to do, rules of exponents, because it's very difficult to explain to students. But another thing that you want them to have, and these are basic skills, squares and square roots. I would print this page out. I would print it and I would put it in. If they can understand what the squares are up to 12 squared, and you can see that's the green diagonal column across the page, if they understand how to use that, that's going to be very helpful to them when you're teaching them the squares and the square roots and how they are used in problems and other formulas. One of the biggest problems our students have is percents, ratios, and proportion. So what's the problem? The problem is they don't understand the language. They don't understand what a percent means. They don't understand what a ratio describes. And they don't understand what a proportion is, how that describes the part to the whole relationship. These are specific examples when it's not good enough to show them a trick that works and how they can make these answers happen, but they have to really understand in a problem, define what is percent, if that's what's being asked for, what a ratio is, and what a proportion is. These are terms that are very important for understanding and responding to the test and the items. Ratio and proportion, I like this example, and you can see the website at the bottom that says Math is Fun. I know many of you use Math is Fun already, but for those that aren't familiar with it, it is a great paper resource. I need to point out some things to you in the resources. You know, we go to a website to look it up, and we can use a lot of it virtually, but the most important thing about many of the resources I'm sharing today is, did you really understand you could print out worksheets? And these are things, if you're still doing a lot of paper and pencil work and instruction, this is a great website to go to. Remember, ratios can have more than two numbers, and I like this particular example because it talks about mixing cement, and there are three things that have to be mixed: sand, stone, and water. And so it's a great real world context way to help people understand that ratio is not just one item to another, one thing to another, okay? But another, like I say, that's a great resource to go to. So let's roll through here. One other thing, the order of operations we mentioned earlier. There are a lot of misconceptions about order of operations. You all know the order of operations, but our students have tremendous difficulty. You understand parentheses first go, then exponents, then multiplication and division, but one doesn't take precedence over the other, and then addition and subtraction. Multiplication and division comes before addition and subtraction, but multiply, divide in order, then move to addition and subtraction in order. We used PEMDAS for many years. I know many of you prefer GEMS, and where we talk about groupings, then exponents, then multiply, divide, left to right, then subtract, add, left to right. I put a large printout of the GEMS moniker for orders of operation if you'd want to print anything out. So that may be helpful to use, or another thing that would go in a workbook. Inequalities, it is so hard. For some reason, just the word inequality kind of gets their hackles up for many students. It's like, oh, you know, they're used to working, quote, equations. They understand when things move across the equal line, you know, the equal sign. For some reason, an inequality just, you know, it causes some consternation. It's a math statement that defines a range of values. And it is really important that they understand the range and how you note it on a number line. They don't know the difference between the filled in circle and the open circle on the range and the inequality. Make sure they understand the difference in the signs. A finite is the included circle, filled in, that is included. An open circle means up to that point, everything either less or greater. So you've got to understand that they have trouble with the inequalities simply because they're used to looking at an equal sign. But what happens on either side is still the same kind of operations. Don't let the sign between, whether it's an equal sign or an inequality, be a stumbling block for them. So with our basic students, because you're teaching multi-level classrooms, but when you're looking at that ABE GED student, ABE to GED, you're going to have, and these are challenges across the board, I don't care what level they're on, you've got to increase the instruction on the problem-solving strategies. And you have to incorporate close reading strategies into the math classroom. You hear close reading strategies are important across all content areas, but we have to remind people that it is equally important in mathematics. We also need to help them emphasize their geometric and increase their geometric and algebraic thinking skills, and instruction in higher order mathematics. We've got to shift from rules or processes to a deeper understanding of why. And I'll show you some examples of that in just a moment. But look at every one of these challenges: problem solving, close reading, higher order thinking skills. When the 2014 test was designed, it was designed so that all the right answers are important, and you have to get the right answers. The important thing was, in every one of the content areas, the test is designed that to be successful, you had to have problem-solving strategies, problem-solving skills, close reading skills, higher order thinking skills, and you also had to have to be able to do text-based, evidence-based writing, argumentative writing. Well, that's not so much in the mathematics, but you have to understand all of those things in every content area. The right answer is important, but using those skills to get to the right answer was the focus and the design behind the change in the test in 2014. And it's still that way today. I did something a little differently in this workshop that usually we put an entire section at the end that's free resources, but I had so many new resources that I've learned that when you do 7 or 8 or 9 different resources, it's kind of a brain dump and you get numb to everything we're putting in front. So every few slides, I'm going to introduce 2 or 3 free resources, and some of you are familiar with them, some of you are not. And when I'm finished with these resources, Melissa and CT, I'd like to take a little break, and if there's some questions we need to go over, we'll take them, and then we'll move to the next section. But the free math, the math drills are free math worksheets. Again, I was looking for paper-based instruction. Guys, I mean, you click on every one of these and there are a multitude of different problems. There's just so much here. It will take some time to code through, but you can print out worksheets that will keep you and your students going for quite some time. So math-drills.com. Another one, I think most of you are familiar with this one, but you know, when we show you the one page like this, I like to open up the site and really start poking around in it, because if you look at the toolbar across the top and you choose your subject, look at how many different places you can go and then get into the worksheets. You can have the lessons, and like it says, there's thousands of variations. You're not going to run out of material. And you can print with or without an answer key on your math worksheet. So it just depends on how you'd like to do it. Again, on Math is Fun, we like to use the puzzles and the puzzles in different categories, because the puzzles and brain teasers are a great group activity and they're just darn fun. And anything we can do to make it fun to get into before they really have to start hammering down and grabbing those concepts and showing us what they can do is all the better for the program and for the students. So Math is Fun, a great resource, lots of print materials. I also wanted to add in, I didn't realize how much stuff Texas Instruments had out there for you to use, but this is a fabulous guidebook that look at all the languages it's available in. If you look over here, available in so many different languages. You can go down and select the calculator that we would be using for the test. You want to click on the Activities tab right here. Click on the Activities tab under the device that we use, and you can access lesson plans designed specifically for the calculator used on the GED test. I think this is just a fabulous resource. And I will show you the kind of things you see. In other words, we went and we highlighted the TI-30XS Multiview calculator. This is just a little bit of a smorgasbord to look at the different real-world context issues and problems that you can do on a printed worksheet for these items. So I really had a good time going through this, to be very honest with you. I don't often take the time to dig around. I honestly leave that for my colleague and sidekick, Susan Pittman, who brings so much of this information to us. Okay, I think this is a good time for me to back up after we see if there's some questions. And Melissa, I'm going to kick to you and we'll talk a little bit about OP when I see if there are questions. Any questions yet?
There were a couple questions. One was, I put down in the chat here, it says the question about absolute value seems to be worded in a confusing way. My students know what the concept of absolute value is, but they still get that question wrong. Is there a trick to that specific question on the test?
You know, I am not, well, number one, I don't know what the specific question looks like on the test, but, and I don't know if there's a trick. I will go back and take a look at how it is worded, and if we can be more clear in how we present it, that is something I would be happy to change. I don't know of any trick to make it easier for them to understand. And you will see my email in the PowerPoint. Let's dialogue about that. And that's a good thing for us to take a look at.
And then just a couple comments about the fraction tiles and things. So not a lot of questions, more just
Okay.
commentary.
Okay. They're handy to use. You can purchase them or you can cut them out of paper for prisons and make them and use them. So that's why we like to use the fraction tiles. Okay. Is that it for questions?
That's it for now.
Okay, I want to bring Melissa in because I got so busy trying to get started, I forgot a very important thing that I wanted to share in the first couple of slides related to the online proctor test. I shared with you that we want you to be knowledgeable about the test because your students may get out, need to continue testing, and with limited testing, we want them to understand how to access it. I am going to ask Melissa to give you all a quick refresh on how you release a student's email, their GED.com account so they can access it on the outside, because I've had a number of people calling in the last 2 months who had forgotten that process. And it's critical that you share OP information and make sure they get their access to their GED.com account. And I don't know how to tell you to do that. So Melissa, would you please refresh our memories on that?
Yes, for sure, Debbie, no problem at all. So basically there are 2 ways that the account can get released. One way is for somebody who has corrections access to GED Manager to do so at your facility. Now, in order for them to do that, they need to know what email address the tester is going to be using after they're released. And for a lot of them, they'll just plan to use the email address that they were using prior. But that's key. They need to know the email address the tester is going to use after release. Once they know that, they'll just log into GED Manager, look up the tester's account, and go into that student detail section and click on the button that's titled Release from Program. And once they do that, all they need to do is enter the email address the tester is going to be using, and then they'll need to click Save. And then once the tester is released, they'll need to go to our GED website and then go to the top right-hand corner where they see the login button. And then at that point, they will enter their email address and then just click on Forget Password so that they will then receive an email to set up the password that they want to access their account going forward. Now, the other way that a tester can get access to their account is to call our customer support line. The number is listed at the bottom of our website, www.ged.com. But really the easiest way to assist a tester is if you know what email address they're going to be using after release. And if you have access to GED Manager, you go ahead and take care of that for them, or you have one of your colleagues who has that type of access to take care of this. Because really it just takes about less than 30 seconds to get it done this way. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Melissa. We'll
No
pick
problem.
right back up. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the successful steps that have to be done for reading and reasoning in mathematics in general. And you're going to see that, oops, let's see. There we go. Those of you who have attended professional development, you see this process. We use it in reasoning through language arts. We talk about it in science, but we are talking about it today in mathematics. How we teach for understanding, reading, reasoning, and formative assessment. You can see the author of this process, but we think it's a great thing that needs to be done across the board. You know, every problem, and now we're talking word problems, or, you know, even some of those that are just written problems that are not word problems. But you want to give it a first read for understanding. Don't try to figure anything out, just read it. You know, second read, identify the problem solving process that you think will work to get an answer and work it. And the third read, you're going to solve the problem and check it for reasonableness. Does the answer make sense? Those are 3 steps in working through word problems. And we can break it down in mathematics to look this way. When they're reading for understanding, these are some of the questions you want a student to ask themselves. At the bottom one, the last bullet, is the most important. What are the questions that are really being asked? And very often they read without paying attention to what are they really asking me to do here? Because if you don't understand that, you're not going to be able to figure out what information is important in the problem, what may not be important. So have them read the problem aloud and see what their reaction is. And most of all, a student has to figure out, do I understand all the words here? What's the real world context? And sometimes there's a picture they can help to visualize. Is there a picture? But for the most part, read it. Do I understand the vocabulary? And what are they asking me to do? So that's the first read. Second read, what are you going to do to solve the problem? And the second one, the second bullet, what problem solving strategies could I use? Well, there's the rub, ladies and gentlemen. Most of our students don't really understand the different problem solving strategies. And if we don't teach them problem solving strategies and we don't make sure that they understand the symbolic language of mathematics, they're not going to be able to solve the problem, or they won't solve it effectively or correctly. So figuring out the problem solving process, making sure they have a problem solving process. And the second read is identifying the problem solving process. Well, what's relevant? Well, very often they don't understand what's important and what's not important. But you've seen this a number of times. We talk about 10 different kinds of strategies to solve a problem. And no one strategy is going to work for every problem that would come up. But you or I can look at these 10 things and these 10 ways we go about addressing a problem. Every one of us could probably say we know how to use almost all of them at some point in time with a problem, but we all have our favorite go-tos. I guarantee you your students may not recognize one, and we have to teach them these problem-solving processes. And this is one of those high impact indicators, because if they have problem-solving strategies in math, if they understand these things in math, they're going to be able to transfer it to the other content areas. That's going to be very important for them. All right. So problem solving, my favorite one is working backwards. If you've given me the answer, I like to work backwards to see how you got there. But I don't always have the answer. So working backwards isn't always the best way to go. Nonetheless, identify a problem solving process. In the workbook that you can download for math that is going to be posted, I'm going to give you I'm going to give you one example of a strategy for each of the 10 problem solving processes. We're just looking at a couple of them today. Guess and check, because I'm not going to try to come up with a formula to figure out if I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, How do I place them in a circle, in the circles, so that the sums across and up and down are the same? I'm just going to throw them out in there. But eventually, when I do this in a workshop, people will come back with 2 solutions. And there's always that forward thinker who can come up with the 3rd solution that I have down there. But again, it's not a difficult thing to just hit or miss, throw stuff in or out, keep adding until you, bingo, hit the right solution. So that's an example of guess and check. But I showed you 10 different examples, and we're gonna have examples in your workbook of 10 things that you could do and work with students and explain those different problem-solving processes. Here's another one that's pretty easy that you could look at. You know, the figure shows 12 toothpicks arranged to form 3 squares. How can you form 5 squares? By moving only 3 toothpicks. Because I want to make sure we cover everything we're talking about today. Oops, I went backwards. Here's the answer. Take a look at how you can pull these 2 over to the top, and you move this one over here, and you create this. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and the outside makes a 5th square. Okay? A lot of people will come up with a way to make 3 squares, but they can't figure out that the wider one is a 5th square. So these are sort of brain teaser things, and it opens students up to learn that there's more than one way to address a problem. On the 3rd time, we understand, now that I understand the problem's content, how am I going to use my math skills to solve the problem? These are the questions when you're checking for reasonableness. How should the answer to the question be expressed? All of these things are questions you ask yourself when you've picked a process and you've worked the problem through. One of the key things we have to do is make sure our students understand their math vocabulary. All of us are familiar with the tiered language. You know, tier 1 is the everyday words that everybody is familiar with. Tier 2 are the academic content language, vocabulary words. We could see the words used across content areas. We're still familiar with them. And the tier 3, those are the ones that are specific to an academic domain. Like you only hear these words probably in the context of math or science, or they're tier 3 things. You want to help build your students' math vocabulary. So I'm going to give you some of these tier 2 words. And if you want to look a little deeper, you see the website linked on the bottom. Look at these words. These are common words. They're vocabulary words from math, for argumentative writing. You'll see them in science, and you'll see them in social studies. So these are the tier 2, just a sample of some vocabulary words for math that you want to make sure students understand. And if you want to get to the tier 3 level, these are not terms. Some of these you would see in science. You'd see independent and dependent variable. You would see some of these in science as tier 3 words, just like you'd see them in math. But again, you must work on building their vocabulary. Don't overlook it as you are just worrying about processes and problems without understanding the vocabulary. They're going to be at a deficit. This is another one. When I first looked at it, well, of course, it tells you in the link, it's worksheets. Again, a plethora of worksheets and all these different areas with all sorts of different themes and processes that you can put on here. So teach knowledge. That it's a lot of fun to spend some time. I know it's an online resource, but from that online resource, you print them out and use them in the classroom. This one we really like because it can translate these math lessons to over 100 languages. And that's really important. Scroll down all the different indicators and topics, and you can see just how deep and diverse this goes, and in the grade levels that you can go into, okay? So AAAknow.com, and I think this was one that was brought to us by a teacher. We get a lot of our best information from the things you find out there that are good resources that you can use. Wanted to show you just an example on polygons. It not only gives you the problem, it is timed, it will let you choose the correct answer, and then it's going to give you the information about the correct answer. So we did pull out, just as an animation on the slide here, looking at this, learning about them, how many sides or angles are in a polygon. Just look at these, and I think we've got one other sample here. Equations, practice with equations. You've got the lesson on top and the worksheet that shows them, then you've got a problem on the bottom. Obviously, if you're doing it as a worksheet, it's not going to be timed, but you have that opportunity. And I put this one in because we've talked to you about the Florida IP Day resource since probably 2014-15 when they posted it out of their professional development group. It still stands as one of the best resources across all of the content areas with lesson plans for ABE, GED, and ESL classes. The materials are very versatile, and it is a turnkey program. You've got lessons, links, videos, outlines, pre-tests, post-tests. All of these are materials that we still see as very useful in moving students forward. So, and the Math Dude, now I am telling you, this is one of those that is a video, so very often you can download them, but we also think this is just one of our better online resources. I know it's something to watch. I'm not sure whether you can use it, but we do know of some prisons that have the ability to use these type of videos downloaded and carried through with restrictions. Let's talk about geometric reasoning. Just like mathematical reasoning with word problems and solving equations is an issue, so is geometric reasoning. And the primary problem, there are three challenges, and it's all related to quantitative reasoning. In each one of the bullets and examples that I pulled here, and I kind of condensed what we spend a lot of time on in individual workshops, but we can compute, students are very good because they've got formula sheets and they understand. If we ask them to compute the area and circumference of circles, they can do it. If we ask them to find the radius or diameter, when we give them the area or circumference, they can't do it. What have we asked them to do? We've asked them to manipulate the formula. Okay, if we give them the information that reads just like the formula, they'll get the answer for us. But if we manipulate the information or the part of the problem that varies from the formula, they have they miss it, period. Same issue, they're pretty good at computing the perimeter or area of polygons because they can look at that formula, they've got it. So if we give them A and B, they're very good because they know A times B or 2 times A plus B will give them the answers. But if we give them the area and give them A but not B, very often the mistakes are made. We also know that in geometry, they have great difficulty understanding the properties of shapes and being able to visualize shapes. So we've got to practice to show them shapes in different orientations and to be able to use their language to explain the relationship between shapes and the properties of shapes. I put that diamond down there. We look at it, we see a diamond. We also could give about 4 different names for that. It's a square, it's a polygon, it's all these different names, but our students don't have that vocabulary to be able to talk about relationships. Very often they can see that there are differences, but they can't explain, they don't know the words to use to explain the differences in the shapes and the sizes and so forth. So that's very important. Getting down to basics with algebraic reasoning. We've talked about geometric reasoning, we've talked about mathematical reasoning. let's talk about algebraic reasoning. One of the most important things is just to know that there are about 5 basics of number knowledge that they've got to have for algebra learning. They've got to understand what equality is. And you think about this, make sure that we don't forget to explain the different notations. In arithmetic, you're going to do something to numbers to get an answer. But in algebra, that equal sign is going to tell you that you're looking at the relationship between 2 factors. Okay, so they've got to understand what equality is. In arithmetic, when they see the equal sign, it means, ta-da, here's the answer. That's not, it's about relationships in algebra. They also need to recognize the operations. Think about arithmetic. A plus sign means you're adding something. In algebra, a plus sign is a positive number, and vice versa. The minus sign for subtraction in arithmetic and a negative number. Make sure they cross that Rubicon and understand that they have some different meanings between arithmetic and algebra. They need to understand the important properties of numbers, and they need to be able to describe patterns and functions. So those are 5 big concepts that you want them to have when they're working in algebra. One of the things we recommend, and you'll see at the bottom of the slide, mathplayground.com, algebra_puzzle. Puzzles are great. They're just like, they're a little different from brain teasers, but they're brain teasers in a lot of ways. But puzzles sometimes help them understand, whether you knew it or not, you were recognizing patterns and relationships. And oh, by the way, those are mathematical relationships. So that's another very important thing for you to keep in mind. This algebra puzzle is pretty darn easy. Again, a little bit of guess and check will get them there. So they're using a problem-solving strategy and they're getting where they need to be. But use puzzles as bell ringers, something they can start out with in the first part of the class, moving them up. So we highly recommend that. They're fun and they don't threaten anybody, and they're good group activities and they engage them. Unless you're like me, don't make it too hard, or I'm just going to wait for the other guy to come up with the answer and then I'll back into it. But we can engage them with puzzles. They're, magic tricks and puzzles are just fun. And they don't even know they're using algebraic thinking until you explain to them that that's what they just did. Translating. Practicing translating is so critical. There are 2 things. A student needs to be able to look at a written problem and to be able to put it in an algebraic form. But by the same token, ladies and gentlemen, they need to be able to look at that algebraic form and say, put that into words. What is that telling you? And here's an example, and we don't have to pull through it because you can read it and respond to it. But if I look at these words and I say, how do you explain that? Write the equation that represents the relationship between the bill for the service call, which we'll call B, for a service call, and the number of hours spent on the call, which we call H. I'm just going to put the steps there for you. You can figure this out. It is very difficult for students to figure this out because they don't always understand the language of math and how to write it. So that's why it's really important to have a sort of a cheat sheet that we use called the Math Translation Guide. And I have that included in your workbook. But the Math Translation Guide is so handy because it gives you something in algebraic written, in the numerical form, and then it spells it out for you in language. That's important. When you have students who have trouble with long and lengthy processes, help them understand that vertical multiplication of a polynomial is acceptable, and sometimes it helps them stay on track. You understand if they've mastered how to multiply vertically, there's no reason you can't show them how to multiply polynomials the same way. We always go back to saying, do you know why they don't do that in textbooks? Look at all the different space it would take. How many pages longer would your textbook be if they had to do it vertically? That's where that trick came from. And I'm not sure it's the best friend of our students and our colleagues who are trying to teach that format. Here's my math translation guide. This is an example of what I was explaining. You have in the left column, English. Here's the words. Well, what do those words mean in math terms? And then we give you an example of something in English, and then we put it in math translation. This is a sheet I would print out and I'd put in their workbook packet. This will help guide them as they are trying to decode a word problem and steer them the right direction. Math antics. Before I go any further, CT, is this a good time to stop for any questions, CT or Melissa? Is somebody on mute, or did I lose the whole audience?
You're still on.
Okay.
I put a, let's see. Sorry, I put one thing in the chat. There was just someone else shared a resource. Someone said they teach GED in Spanish. Do I have permission to translate some of the content in this presentation to share with my students?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Anything you can do to use this with your students, you have carte blanche to do so.
There are a couple
That makes it easy.
A couple folks who said they were having issue downloading the presentation. I've tried it on a couple devices.
Yeah.
And it seems to be working for me. So we might find another way to get this out through some other channels. Maybe we'll push something out on InSession or through the corrections forum group.
Okay. Yeah, I'll leave that to you. And again, I have found that when I offer to let people email me directly, it's a very easy thing to do. I'll just poke it right out to them because they should have no problem with the PDF, email like that. So we'll give it a shot either way, CT. But thank you.
And then just lots of good comments on the content.
Hot diggies, that's always good to know. Okay, well, we keep plowing through so you have time to ask more questions, and we'll finish on time or a little early, and I've never heard anyone complain about that. So, okay, math antics, I do believe many of you are aware of that, but I put it in here because I know not everybody knows about math antics. Now these, again, I tried to bring you a lot of paper resources. This does have worksheets and it does have instructional videos. It's a combination of instructional videos. $20 a year subscription gets teachers access to exercises and worksheets. Probably a good investment one way or the other. And again, many of our providers have highly recommended this. So we will go with that one. Annenberg Learner. From day one, we have always promoted the good things that you find at the Annenberg Learner. But as we wanted to refresh, I think everybody knows we promote all content area materials with the Annenberg Learner. For those of you who are not familiar with the Annenberg Learner, it is such a robust course that, and it's free. If you just want to go in and poke around and look and learn, to be very honest, when the new test came out, many of us needed to ratchet up our math skills to remember how to do the type of algebraic things that we hadn't done in a long time and were going to be required on this test. I can tell you right now, I did a course with the Annenberg Learner to refresh and remind myself of the things I needed to do. These are considered so robust that if you wanted to pay for the course, you could get credit issued for the courses. So I say that only so that you'll understand that it is a very thorough and robust lesson and resource to use. But for today's purposes, I wanted you to know that there's a lot of stuff that you can download the lessons and use them for class, okay? We're teachers, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. I tell everybody, I was probably, I didn't realize I was learning to be the greatest thief in the universe until I found out that every good teacher knows how to go and find and take things and reuse them. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Good instruction is good instruction. Here, I'm going to share with you, one of your colleagues in the state of Arizona has this website on YouTube. And again, these are webs, but some of you can use things off of the website and the YouTube channel and bring them in. I gave you the URL. This is Light and Salt Learning, a YouTube channel. It is primarily math content, but she does have some science and RLA videos, and we give her credit there. Kate Redmond, an adult ed teacher in Arizona. And we've had good comments from people who have studied and worked and used the website. So I wanted you to know it was available. Math Crash Course, we have shared on some presentations, but we continue to hear good things about its use. So I wanted to make sure that you all had access to the Math Crash Course. That site is listed below. Again, they're videos, but there are practice problems that you can use also. Now, as we're talking about free resources, I've kind of gone through the laundry list of all the things that we had found that are not tied to GED testing service. But I want you to understand one of the best free resources that we have at GED Testing Service is the Enhanced GED Ready Score Report. And if we are not utilizing it, you are missing a very valuable resource. And I'm very proud of the work that our team has done to continue to enhance and make this more user-friendly, both for educators and for our students. So everybody knows what the score report looks like. They have had some upgrades to it. Here is someone who actually, it was my test. CT, you may remember back early in 2014 when they said, you guys just go in there and take the test. Don't worry about studying. We just need to make sure all the bells and whistles are where we think we are. So I was very relieved to know that I squeaked by and passed without any studying on the math. And also, when you open up your score report, you're going to link to your study material. All right, we've made some changes there. Now you can see I went and identified, say, Aztec. I can change, I can use multiple sources here, but one of the things we realized, it used to be a long laundry list of information. And that laundry list confused a lot of people. And the students, the one thing we know is they know what the book looks like, but they couldn't tell you the name of the course or the publisher who uses it. And so our list like that was hard for them to navigate. So what our group has done, now when they go to select their program or book to study, one thing we know, they recognize the books that they use. They may not know the name or the company, but they recognize it. So they went in and fixed it where they select the appearance of the books or the software program that they're using. So that's made it a lot easier for students to move forward and select their materials. What we have done also, based on lots and lots of student input and educator input about what they liked and didn't like about the score report, we had changed how we format the skills list and the the skills to improve checklist. No longer do you have to get to the bottom to see where you're supposed to go in either the modules on the software or the pages in the book. We put it right up front. Here's what you're having trouble with. We've put it in easier to understand language. This is what you need to be working on, okay? We heard loud and clear that some of the comments on there were a little too, not as direct as we would hope they would have been, as some of the educators were looking for. So I think you're going to find this a much more direct and easier to access skills list. So that was another improvement that was made. And teachers said, when we go to print the score report out, it would be really nice to have a notes column over here that we could write. If I'm working with the student, I'm seeing the pages they need to study, I may have some directions I want, or what he should focus on, or what I've seen. So now you don't see this when you open up the score report, but if you go to print out the score report, it prints with this notes column over here. And that makes it very efficient and easy for you to use. All right. Everything I just showed you is in our in-session educator newsletter. It was announced in a recent newsletter. And so we hear all the time, oh, in-session, how do you get signed up for that? It is on the bottom or the footer of every page on GED.com in the educator and administrator pages, okay? Sign up for in-session because everything I just pulled from there, I got out of our in-session newsletter. So if you want to be the first to know anything and everything about what's going on, you need to do the in-session newsletter. Really great piece of advice. I got to tell you, I've been with the testing service for 10 years. Now that we are all remote, I find it one of the best ways once a month to make sure I'm not missing anything. It also gets you signed up so that you'll be notified of every one of our Tuesdays for Teachers or other types of professional development that you're eligible for. So if you don't already get it, sign up. You only get something once a month. Everyone knows about our website, but it's still where we need to be. Educators and administrators, I'm very often appalled at how many times I still get educators or administrators, and usually they're new because we forget to go back and remind people of the basic things we take for granted. They'll say, I can't find that. When I log in, it sends me so-and-so. Tell your new teachers this and this, the login and the sign up, those are to take you to the student portal. That's where our students go to see and learn. And there's nothing wrong with you having an account there, but help us out. I want to make sure we know that you're not a student. So we're not trying to get information from you or help you move along to get to the test. Just put the word teacher or administrator in your first or last name, and we're going to be happy to see you surfing in to see what your students see so you can share information with them about what they need to be doing. It's a very important point. Now, if we want to identify resources, one of the great places to go is to our website. We have a wealth of publishers there, some who we have co-developed things with, such as GED Flash, others that we have had partnerships and they are vetted with materials that we know are aligned to our test. And CT, if you have any additional information about the resources, I'd be happy for you to add them. We've got some time to talk about any promotions or anything that would be relevant.
I think any of the promotions that are going on right now are direct to test taker, probably aren't too applicable with this group, but
Okay.
many of these resources are out there. And if anyone does have student access to Flash rather than through the organizations, it's been extended. But again, I think those are probably not applicable to this group.
Okay, good enough. I wanted to make sure I wasn't skipping over anything. But nonetheless, you can find those resources on our website. And last but not least, other than, enjoying my work with Arkansas and California, I truly enjoy the professional development opportunities that Susan and I get to do. Make sure, and I put this as I thought about what can we do for you all in this time with the changing market, how we can reach you. I thought it's like the old adage, everything old is new again. Our Tuesdays for Teachers are out there. We have on-demand specific webinars and discussions. Many of you go through your state relationship managers when you have something special that you're concerned with. Now is a perfect time because often when we try to do things in person, that there is a cost to it, and we have to be sensitive to the numbers of people that we will have before it's easy for me to get travel. And of course, nobody's traveling right now. but it takes nothing to jump on a phone call with you. And I've done this with many of my programs in California and in Arkansas. Skip over to the right column where I said, think small and call on us. Very often, just to get a Q&A sometimes, if you're having a staff meeting and you'd like for us to hop on the phone just for 30 minutes to answer questions. Somebody was asking about this. There's no question too small. Or if you need us to discuss with staff who are new to adult education, if we need to have a discussion with some new people, let's put them all together, take 30, 45 minutes, or do a deep dive into a particular area. And most importantly, for those of you who have access to GED Manager or other programs, if you don't know how to use them effectively, it's not my forte, but my colleague Melissa and I would be happy to help, because there's so much you can do with those tools, but you have to know how to use them. And if you're not using them effectively, it does hinder how you can manage your program, how you can guide the content and instruction in your program. And in the middle column, always make sure you spend some time looking at our classroom materials, at our teaching resources. I highlighted that because I told you about the performance level descriptors. That is the same thing as the skills needed to pass. If you open up that link in the left-hand side of our educator and administrator homepage, that'll take you directly to the performance level indicators, our professional development, our products, and a chance to promote your program. With that said, I think we may have answered a lot of questions along the way. CT, if there are no other questions, I'd like to invite Melissa to come back in. So I'm going to ask you first, CT, is there anything you would like to say as we're winding up here?
We had a question about, they said they're using the Kaplan GED book. It says, but I'm curious on what pre-books you would recommend.
Ooh.
We've been using Common Core, but that curriculum has changed. So I don't know if you have an answer to that one.
I don't have an offhand, just in my back pocket answer, but I'd be happy to have a discussion with you offline about some recommendations that we could make. You're looking for the ABE that would lead into that book. And I do think we could direct you to some resources. So
Great.
With that said, I'm going to put my email up there, because that's something anybody who has a question that doesn't get asked here or wants to ask it, either send it directly to me or to help@ged.com, and it will find its way to me based on what you're asking.
And there were about 3 or 4 questions about the corrections forum group that I mentioned. I think Melissa might talk a little bit about it, but just in general, that group is made up of basically the heads of education for state DOCs. They meet on roughly a quarterly basis, and they're kind of an advisory group for us and with each other.
Well, if that's all the questions, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, and I'm going to thank you all for sharing the time with me. And don't be strangers. I get, it's the funniest thing when people from states that I'm the relationship manager for will call me. They say, I don't know if you'd be the one I should ask. And my response is, well, what do you think my job is? I am the person you're supposed to ask. It never means I have all the right answers, but I got a pretty good idea where to go for an answer if I don't know it. So please use us as a resource. Don't ever sweat and fret over an answer when a short email or a quick call can probably take care of your issue. And with that, Melissa, I'll let you do your remarks, and we will say adieu.
Thanks so much, Debbie. As I did explain the process to release testers earlier on in this presentation, I wanted to let you know that we do have a how-to guide for that. I did post it in the chat. Hopefully everybody can see the link there. But also you can find it on our website. If you do go to the educators and admins section that Debbie pointed out, along the left-hand side of your screen, you will see a testing and corrections section. And if you click on that, then you will see that there are other how-to guides. For those that have corrections access to GED Manager, you'll see the how-to guides for running passers reports, for creating accounts in GED Manager, for suggestions on the best way to look up testers' accounts in GED Manager, as well as the steps that testers would need to take to access their account after release if they weren't able to get help at the correctional facility that they were at. And even the test center support line number document is there. So if you haven't seen that part of our website, I would encourage you to go and take a look. And as we close here, first of all, I want to thank Debbie. Debbie did an amazing job. What she delivered was extremely informative, and particularly the way that you highlighted the key skills that students need that can transfer across content areas and the resources needed to address the skills for in-person or remote delivery of instruction. You provided a wealth of examples, and I'm sure that the attendees are appreciative of that. Thank you also to our Corrections Forum members, the Directors of Education for state DOCs, for all of your hard work and guidance during this pandemic. And thank you to our attendees. Again, we will make the recording of today's session available to you and those that could not make today's session. We ask that you consider joining us tomorrow for our second mini conference session. Tomorrow we have Dr. Penny Heddlefeld from North Dakota Corrections presenting on 2 topics at 1 p.m. Central. The focus of our presentation will be on how her state overhauled their focus of education and practices at their minimum, medium, and maximum facilities. And she's also going to share with you the mantra that the NDDOCR Education Department studies and implements to meet each student where they are to get them to the finish line of a graduate. So hopefully you can join or spread the word to those who would be interested in this topic. And with that, we will wrap things up for today. Again, thank you for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye-bye.